next guest says President Obama's financial reform plan will not limit the size of banks. It will only expand the powers of the government. Kevin Hassett is Director of Economic Policy Studies at American Enterprise Institute, joining me from D.C. Kevin, of course, always good to talk with you. I know you are critical about these financial regulatory reform plans. And, you know, I know that you say, look, it's not going to take care of too big to fail. But so what if the government becomes more involved in Wall Street? Isn't that a good thing?
No, because what the government's doing is it's going to list a few firms, I think the latest count might be 15, who more or less have government backing. If their debt goes down, then the government is going to bail it out. There's sort of unlimited power to guarantee debt in a crisis. And what that's going to do is it's going to take all the other firms who aren't on that list and make it very hard for them to compete with the big guys, because the big guys are going to have a lower cost of capital. And so what it's really doing is setting us up for a bigger crisis down the road, because there are going to be very few financial firms. I have a column coming out on Monday on the Bloomberg terminal where I talk about what the model really is, that they're turning the big financial firms into like the 1960s phone company. So they're going to be big, near monopolies, and they're going to have the government sort of in every end of their business.
But I don't understand. I mean, in some ways, I'm not sure if I follow that logic, because it's not as if these Wall Street firms themselves, just because you have that guarantee, let's say that quote-unquote guarantee from the government, does that really mean that they're just going to want to go to the government for help all the time? I mean, does that really mean, I mean, nobody, what I'm saying is that no Wall Street firm wants to go to the government. So just because it's there doesn't mean that they're going to actually take that.
Well, it's a tricky call for them, really, and I think that they are more or less now looking like they're on board with this bill. I think the bill is almost sure to pass. But what's going on is that the government is walling off your business, so that there are not going to be a lot of competitors innovating and trying to steal your business. But at the same time, they're telling you, well, you get to invest in this, but you don't get to invest in that, and so on. And so they're intruding in your business. And on net, it's hard to say exactly how it would work out for them. I can say that markets are speaking and saying that it's not looking like a big negative for the big financial firms. You know, since this reform bill went from being kind of possible to looking like a lock, you didn't really see any share price movements at all with the big banks and so on.
No, actually, they've done pretty well, even with this regulatory overhang. But, you know, Kevin, what's wrong with a bailout fund that is funded by the banks? What is wrong with a consumer protection agency? What is wrong with making derivatives more transparent?
Well, there's nothing wrong with making derivatives more transparent. I think that the problem with the bailout fund is just what I said. What it does is it makes it harder for small, innovative firms to come in and compete with the big guys, and so it concentrates finance in the big firms, which makes them more exposed and us more exposed to a crisis down the road. The Consumer Financial Protection Agency, the problem with increasing those consumer protections is just that you're going to, again, increase all the regulation and red tape that anyone who lends money to people might have to go through, and that's going to make it really hard for a little guy to play ball, because the fixed costs of doing business, of lending to consumers, will be so high.
Okay. Kevin, I know in your recent column you were quite critical about the economists inside the White House. You know, we can talk about Summers, talk about you know, others like Orzag as well as Volcker. Who do you think is the most egregious, in your view, in following political lines?
Well, you know, the only one I mentioned was the meeting with Larry Summers, where they took the big bank presidents and brought them into a smoke-filled room in the White House and more or less ordered them to get in line behind this bill and not lobby against it and so on. And that kind of intrusion on your First Amendment right to speak against a bill is kind of unprecedented. I have a friend who used to work in the White House, and he said, if anyone had asked me if you could have that meeting, I would have said no. And to see economists out there playing political hardball is somewhat unprecedented. And I think it's a sign really of how we got to this point where economics isn't really nearly as important as politics. It's because the economists are playing politics.
Okay. All right, Kevin, we'll have to leave it there, but good to see you as always. Kevin Hassett of the AEI.